Aggression is one of the most researched psychological constructs of all time. Where does it originate from? Is it more nature? Is it more nurture? Can playing violent video games really make people into serial killers? Well, Bandura and his colleagues back in the 1960s were interested in the same question. They didn't approach the question of aggression from a nature perspective, but rather they were interested in how children learn aggression over time. This famous study, more colloquially known as the Bobo doll experiment, is still being taught in psychology classes around the world today because it is from this study that Bandura and his colleagues derived the concept known as social learning theory. In this study, Bandura and his colleagues took a bunch of children and they put them into 4 different conditions. These conditions involved observing adults of both genders in aggressive situations and non-aggressive situations. And of course, there was a control group. What they wanted to see was if children observed adults behaving aggressively towards a Bobo doll, would they act the same? That is, did children imitate aggression that they observed? And they found that they did. The children that observed adults behaving in violent ways tend to mimic the exact same behaviors that they saw the adults mimicking. And the children that were put in the non-aggressive groups tended to act in less aggressive ways than both the aggressive groups and the control groups, indicating that what children observe adults doing has a profound effect on their behaviors and their actions. Furthermore, Bandura and his colleagues did notice the presence of a gender effect. That is, boys were more likely to imitate male adult models and girls were more likely to imitate female adult models. Remembering back then in 1960s, gender was considered to be a dichotomous variable in that you were in a category of one or the other. One of the things that hasn't necessarily aged as well, as we understand that gender is far more fluid now. Interestingly also is boys tended to be far more likely to imitate physical aggression, whereas girls tended to be far more likely to imitate verbal aggression that they saw. These findings have real-world utility because this mirrors a lot of what we see in real life in terms of gender effects and aggression. What's really interesting from this study is it does denote that aggression can be learned. Now, obviously, since then, more and more research has come about and we understand that aggression is far more complex than either purely nature or purely nurture. But it does tell us something about how we learn through imitation and through observing. This finding is not just limited to aggression. In fact, most of the learning that takes place is done through a social environment because humans are inherently social creatures. The findings of this study have profound implications for social psychological researchers today, but also for people who are just working with people in a social environment. While the effects of social learning theory may be more obvious when working with children or adolescents, they are still present working with adults. And if you are an adult yourself, I'm sure you can think of times where you've entered a new environment or a new context and you've learned how to behave or what you should be doing based on the behaviors of others around you. This could be when traveling, when entering a new workforce, or even when just walking around the street and seeing how people are observing. We have learned that if we act in a similar way to the people around us, we are more likely to be accepted and we are less likely to be perceived as a threat. Therefore, this has an evolutionary effect on our behaviors, and subsequently, we are still doing it today, despite how far we have come since then. That is why Bandura and his colleagues' study is still being taught in psychology today and still has profound effects.